Hi, we are live Saturday morning, week 3 of the CFB DFS CFF player prop slate. Letter winners here. I am Eric Froton at CF Froton with NBC Sports Edge. My co-host again, Mike Bainbridge at M Bainbridge CFF, purveyor of the CFF site. You'll have to forgive Mr. Bainbridge this week. He suffered a devastating loss to me in the industry Dynasty League CFF last week. A narrow 5-point margin where when we went to bed, he was up, and then a stat correction actually gave me the win. It took 10 points away from him. So, Mike, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but you understand the better man won.
Well, that's debatable. But, I figured, this league has been going on for 4 or 5 years at this point. I've made the playoffs every single year, championship game in 3 of the years. So I figured let's give some other folks a chance at winning that league.
That is very kind of you. And since I have not been in the league until this year, that explains your success in my absence. Okay, moving on to the late breaking interview news. Some of the important news that we got from this week. North Texas, DeAndre Torrey left the game in the third quarter last week, obviously against SMU where they were losing. So, it could have been a precautionary thing, could have been serious. We don't have a lot of actionable information on that. However, after he left, we saw Ragsdale had 4 carries for 19 yards, and then Isaiah Johnson had 6 carries for 11 yards. I think we probably see a split of some kind between those two if Torrey can't go. Next, Sky Moore, Western Michigan, hasn't been able to play most of the season. It's been the Jalen Reed. I forget, there's 2 of them. They're both in Western Michigan. It's crazy. But he is expected to play today versus Pitt. He was a potent weapon for Western Michigan, and Caleb Ellaby, who has clearly missed him this year. Only 2 touchdown passes for Ellaby. They definitely need him for a little infusion in that passing game. Next, Jordan Yates. Expected to start versus Clemson with James Sims may play, is expected to play. A little bit of conjecture on that. But, anytime you got 2 QBs, that's always got to be kind of a concern. And they're playing Clemson, so it's not going to really have much impact, except for maybe somebody like Mike Bainbridge, who took James Sims in the 50-teamer. Moving on to Jabari Small and Tyron Evans for Tennessee. Both of them hope to return. Both of them are banged up. Obviously, they're playing Tennessee Tech this week, so it's not a case where there's going to be you're not going to be able to put props on them. It's not really going to be relevant for the sides. But if you're in a college fantasy football league and that is a plum matchup for these two, you're certainly going to want to be abreast of what's going on in that situation as it breaks. Michael, do you have any opinions on those 4 news bites?
Yeah, I thought we were friends. Why are you taking shots? That's like the second or third shot already. We're not even 5 minutes in. Yeah, DeAndre Torrey is probably of most interest to me. I did sprinkle in a little under 57.5 for that matchup with UAB this weekend. So if he's out, I don't have, I think it's maybe 40 career carries between the 2 backups there. So it's not as though they're getting great QB play from Jace Ruder. They'll be without Tommy Bush already, who suffered an injury last week. Deontay Simpson hasn't played yet this season. So if DeAndre Torrey is in fact out, I do like that play of under 57.5. The other plays, Tennessee's probably going to win big, so not a ton of interest there for their backfield. And then obviously 0 interest in the Georgia Tech situation facing Clemson, who's probably going to roll.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with North Texas, as you mentioned, the wide receiver core kind of depleted. Preseason, Jair Shorter was clearly the number 1 guy, but it seems Rod Burns. And, who hasn't had a couple of Rod Burns in their life? So he, I think he went for like 12 and 140 last game against SMU in a losing effort. They're playing UAB this week, so you have to expect they'll probably have some kind of a positive game streak for the passing game in at least the second half. I expect UAB to be, with a very stout defense, obviously well-run organization, probably is going to get the dub here. But definitely something to watch out, at least in the passing game. Next set of news. Armani Goodwin, highly touted true freshman running back for LSU, is out this week, as well as John Emery Jr. has apparently academic issues, which he is supposedly, to some extent, fighting or presenting new information. But he isn't going to play this week against Central Michigan. So that leaves Tyrion Davis-Price, And freshman Corey Kiner, who actually led LSU last week in rushing and looked very good in the process. He was a top 10 running back recruit, a high 4-star, and a lot is expected of him. Do you think we see Corey Kiner kind of have his breakout performance? Do you think they feed him against Central Michigan, Mike?
I hope. I think it's time both in the LSU backfield and in their wide receiver core. They need to out with the old and in with the new here. I think we know what Tyrion Davis-Price is at this point, and with John Emery being out, I think we'll see increased reps for Corey Kiner and some of the freshmen in that passing game. So I know you'll talk about Kiner later in the show as a possible play for the night slate. But I do suspect increased work for Kiner this week.
Certainly. A couple more items here. Jordan Brookshire, quarterback for San Diego State, is doubtful against Utah. That is obviously an issue because we saw Utah last week get handled pretty well by BYU in a 27-17, somewhere in that ballpark win, where they were actually the dogs. So, San Diego State has looked pretty good. They went out and they took out a pretty good Pac-12 team last week and did so in pretty impressive fashion. So with Brookshire out, that certainly takes a lot of the luster off that potential upset pick against Utah, and definitely gives a little more steam to Utah coming off a tough win. They're going to want to they're going to be out for blood. So, they gotta reestablish themselves. Next, BC, Phil Dracovic, unfortunately, terrible, hurt his hand. He's looking to be a long-term, potentially season-ending injury. With him out, Dennis Totally Grossell will be starting against Temple. Now, Temple, this is a game that we'll be talking about later, but Temple lost to Rutgers 61-14 week 1. So even though the QB is out, that's certainly something to be aware of. And lastly, Drake London, USC, questionable. Looking to be a coin toss against Wazoo. Keep in mind, USC put the boots to Wazoo last year, 38-13. It was an evisceration. Jaden Delore was benched. He's looking to start again. But I think that you'll see, Jared Guarantano, my favorite quarterback to prop bet against last year, him and Stetson Bennett. Both of them, still getting starts. Bless them. Hopefully we'll be able to wager against them soon. But you could see him certainly if Delore struggles against USC, though. I mean, who knows what we're going to get out of the Trojans since they're in disarray following the merciful firing, albeit a bit overdue, of Clay Helton. So, Mike, some thoughts on those three issues?
Yeah, are you wearing that USC jersey in celebration of the firing?
That's right. I'm wearing it. This is a Matt Leinart jersey, and the reason why I'm wearing it is because he obviously – I had him in college fantasy. He won me a Boz Cup in my home league, so he has been forever immortalized in the CCC Nordic God Ring of Honor.
All right. Just on Drake London real quick. Before Clay Helton was fired, I believe he mentioned that Drake London should be ready to go this week. I think they took him out more for precautionary reasons. So still listed as questionable, need to do our due diligence pregame, but I do expect him to play this week. If he doesn't, and we'll talk about this later, I believe, Taj Washington, Gary Bryant Jr., definite options for your daily fantasy lineups.
Yeah, certainly. Gosh, I was hoping to see a little bit more out of Gary Bryant Jr., manning most of the slot reps over Joseph Manjack last week. Simply didn't happen. 4 catches for 11 yards. You'd like to see more because all the practice reports that you heard coming out of camp from Shotgun Spratling and Keely Ure were just that he was almost uncoverable in the slot. So, we'll see. Obviously, USC did well against Wazoo last year, so maybe that'll continue or maybe not. We'll transition over to some side plays here to start out. The aforementioned BC Eagles, currently 14.5-point favorites over Temple. As I alluded to, Temple went out and got absolutely crushed by Rutgers, 61-14. In week 1, and then came out and faced a lower division. It's not a lower division opponent. Might as well be Akron. I mean, they're one of the 5 worst teams in the FBS. I feel pretty confident saying that, at least over the past few seasons. No offense to Tom Ash, their second-year head coach, but they went out and beat a weak Akron team 45-24 last week. The fact that Akron scored 24 points on them enough should tell you that something's wrong. But even with the fact that they are starting their second quarterback, BC, Dennis Grossell is a redshirt senior. He's been around for 5-6 years. He's already started a few games. He has 1,664 career passing yards. He's a credible backup. He had to come in last year when Dracovic got banged up, and he performed well. I remember watching
500 yards, 500 yards against Virginia.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, this is he can play. You still got Zay Flowers. Jalen Gill might be coming back. It's still kind of iffy, but he is running routes in practice right now. And obviously, Mike, you took Trey Barry in the P5 league and pretty late, and he's been a revelation. Gosh, that tight end spot for BC is just a honey hole every year in and year out. Obviously, Hunter Long was a 5th-round draft pick last year, and he's thrived in that system. I just think that, gosh, with DeJuan Mathis, who it just can't throw a forward pass, but even so, he got hurt last week. You had a true freshman in there making his first start, and he did credibly well against Akron. But look, this is BC. Jeff Hafley, former defensive guru in the NFL, was hired away from the NFL by Ohio State. Ryan Day, I know this for personal fact insider info, he was trying to get Hafley for years. He loved Hafley, and finally they just backed up the Brinks truck to him to Ohio State. He was only there for a little while, and then boom, BC comes right in, brings him in. He brings in Frank Signetti, another NFL offensive coordinator who's done great things to really revolutionize the Steve Adazio 3 yards and a cloud of feces offense that he was running. So really, really think that BC is going to probably put a little more effort into beating up on Temple, simply because they're going to want to make sure Grossel's getting all the reps and he's ready to go. I feel great about it. I think it's going to be an absolute smashing bloodbath in that one. Next, SMU over Louisiana Tech, 10.5. I think it's even gone up to 11 now. SMU, we saw him against North Texas, a fellow CUSA school last week. This is a damn good SMU team. And they were good last year, but it looks like even though they lost, Shane Buechele, Tara Mordecai, former Oklahoma recruit who came in against Texas last year in relief of Spencer Rattler and is a seasoned guy, was given the go-ahead because Lincoln Riley, obviously head coach of Oklahoma, the offensive coordinator, co-OC of SMU, is Lincoln Riley's brother. So literally going from Oklahoma to SMU, he got a good report from Lincoln over to his brother and said, look, this kid can play, but we don't have anywhere to go. We got Caleb, we got Spencer, and he has looked absolutely magnificent for these first 2 weeks. I just think it's going to be too much for Louisiana Tech, who's okay, and they have Austin Kendall, who obviously went in there. You know that, Michael. But Jesus, I can't help. But I just think that it's going to be too much offense for SMU, who obviously has an improved defense too. They held North Texas to only 12 points. That's obviously a pretty potent offensive attack there. So I'm going to go with those two. Michael, who do you like for this week?
Yeah, I got Liberty minus 27 over Old Dominion this week. I'm going to read it because I want to get the quote right. The starting safety for Old Dominion said, in quote, about Liberty starting quarterback Malik Willis. He's a good guy once he gets out of the pocket, but I don't think he can pass the ball that good. Maybe accurate, maybe not, but you don't say that as a major underdog going against Liberty. Malik Willis, obviously a talented quarterback, maybe not living up to the expectations just yet as the QB1 in our college fantasy football realm. But this is an Old Dominion team that has played just 3 games in the last, 2 years. They, in their week 1 opponent against Wake Forest, under 100 yards passing, 3.7 yards per carry on the ground. Liberty is allowing just 2.2 yards a carry on the ground thus far. I think Liberty, with the added motivation from these quotes, dominates Old Dominion.
Yeah, in addition to that, Liberty had a pretty competitive game against Troy last week, where they, I think put up about 24 points or so. It wasn't, the typical Liberty explosion. And as you mentioned with Old Dominion, you've seen these teams that didn't play last year, Old Dominion, UConn, are in disarray. I mean, despite the fact they had Daryl Mack transfer in, still, you go without a full season of practicing, of playing, the recruits. It was an exodus from Old Dominion in terms of their transfer portal. Probably like 20 guys are in the portal for ODU, and they're having to completely rebuild their whole roster just in 1 year after having nothing. That's a tall order. I actually backed Wake Forest, as you mentioned, in week 1. It was a 31 was the line. They actually, Wake Forest just squeaked it out with 32, but the game wasn't even that close. It was basically just being merciful towards the end, towards Old Dominion, because that program is absolutely reeling, as you mentioned. Also throwing in an upset special if we got to go with a money line play to have a little fun. I like UVA +8 right now and +250 over North Carolina. We saw North Carolina week 1. Everybody's expecting, they're 5.5-point favorites. They're going to come in, and Virginia Tech, Justin Fuente, he's on the hot seat. What's going to happen? Hendon Hooker left. No more Khalil Herbert. So many different questions surrounding Virginia Tech coming in, but they had a banner recruiting class, excellent recruiting class this year after a pretty poor one. I think it was in the 50s the year prior. And they came out and they just absolutely dominated North Carolina's porous offensive line. And if that's going to happen again, obviously North Carolina had a cupcake last week and they looked wonderful. Oh, great. But now you get against UVA, who has also looked great the first 2 weeks. Brennan Armstrong is slinging. He was a top 10, pretty much right around that top 10 consensus CFF QB, and he's even higher now. I mean, you're probably in the top 5 at this point. He's just looked incredible. It's been a boon for their passing attack. Rashawn Henry, Dontavian Wicks, a sophomore, has really emerged. Billy Kemp is an all-purpose can line up in the backfield, line up in the slot. He's very crafty, gets those short targets. I just think it's, UVA is much better than, I guess this line is giving them credit for at +8. So at +50 on the money line, hell, have a go at it. Moving over to the DFS side of things, my main slate. Core 2 plays. I'm going to go. I'll tell you the DFS optimizer for NBC Sports really loves the Purdue Notre Dame game to be a complete shootout, and I think that's pretty reasonable given what we saw Notre Dame's defense do or didn't do against Toledo last week, and then Florida State week 1 by a team that got beat by Jacksonville State last week. So a couple of teams that shouldn't be lighting up Notre Dame secondary with Kyle Hampton back there, they're lighting up Notre Dame secondary. So I'm going with Jake Plummer. Jake Plummer. Right. Good job, Eric. Now, Jack Plummer, not Jake the Snake, $7,900. Pretty, in terms of value, there's some okay plays here at quarterback, but down the board, it's not a lot of sexy, cheaper plays like we've seen kind of in the first 2 weeks. So I'm going to ride Plummer pretty confidently here, where they're the passing offense. As I kind of mentioned previously in my column where I talked about it, they've thrown for 310, 309, and 308 each of the past 3 years on average. That's what Brom does. They throw, and obviously, are you down with the king? As Run DMC once sang, I am. King Doru, $4,600. Smoking. All right, Xander Horvath is out. We all know it. Did they not figure that out? No, nobody rang them up and said, hey guys, $4,600 King Doru, 12 carries, 72 yards, and a touchdown last week. He's going to get plenty of air yards because they're going to be targeting him out of the backfield. That's what they do. He's clearly the guy. $4,600. That is a smoking deal. Well worth having as a core play in your DraftKings DFS lineups. Mike, take the floor.
Yeah, my turn to take a shot at you. You're banking on that Purdue running back. Purdue was one of the worst rushing teams in the nation last year. They're not very good again this year. I think they're averaging right around 3 yards a carry. I'm steering clear of the king, even against the Notre Dame defense that looks, not what we've seen in years past. My two core plays at the running back position. Love Cameron Harris this week for Miami. Don Chaney Jr. out for the year. I believe Jalen Knighton still suspended. I don't expect him to play. Sounds like a true freshman is going to be the backup. The expectation this week is that Cameron Harris is going to get at least 20 touches, whether via the run or pass. At 5,400, I think you have to have him in your lineup. Michigan State, average defense. I think they're around 50th in rush success defensively. So, get 20 carries against an average defense. I think you got to have that in your lineup. Another player who I know you're a big fan of, Trey Henderson with Ohio State. His snap counts absolutely jumped from week 1 to week 2. I think 38 snaps total.
7 in week 1 and 6 kickoffs to 38 snaps in week 2. And they took him off of kickoff duties because they're like, why bother? Why have a Jalen Waddle situation?
Yep, exactly. So I do think that Ohio State is going to try and run the ball a little bit more this week. Last week against Oregon, just kind of the game script dictated them having to throw the ball, trying to come back from behind. I think Ohio State will try to establish some consistency on the ground. Offensive line has actually played fairly well, even though they've garnered some criticism. CJ Stroud has garnered some unwarranted criticism to this point. Some deserve, some not. But I do think they kind of take the pressure off the passing game this week, look to get the ground game moving. Trey Henderson can do it via the run or pass. I think he'll find the end zone at least once this week.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable to expect. Obviously, Master Teague has been marginalized in that rotation. Certainly, we're against Oregon, and now against Tulsa. It's kind of a showcase game where they can kind of take the cuffs off of Henderson and let him go maybe a little bit and get him rolling, get some confidence, because he does need some reps. Certainly. If we're playing some bargains, as I mentioned, there's not a lot in the QB front, but I think Brendan Lewis, with his rushing ability at $5,500 against a Minnesota team that we saw, give up plenty of yards to Ohio State, even though obviously that's a juggernaut. But I'm not really particularly concerned about Minnesota's defense being too stout. When it comes to Lewis, you saw him last week, 7 carries, 77 yards, I believe, something along those lines. He's had like 132 yards he's gained so far. He's had 3 sacks, which knocked some off. But in terms of his rushing productivity, he's very good out of structure. And when he gets flushed, he's not exactly going to go and step up and stick and deliver a 20-yard strike when he's under pressure. But his running ability is right there. It's not quite Cunningham level that we saw last night in that game, but he certainly has the acumen, and he's completing about 60% of his passes. So he's not been bad, but he hasn't been asked to do much by College Orel. I think they're going to have to throw or at least score a little more against Minnesota than Texas A&M last week, who had Haynes King get hurt very early, had Zach Calzada come in, who did not look up to the challenge in a 10-7, just an eyesore of a game. So, if we're going with the low slate, we're trying to find a bargain. I think rather than maybe stick a speculative running back pick into your super flex, maybe take a look at Brendan Lewis. Next, Braden Lenzy for Notre Dame. When it comes to Lenzy, the thing is with him, he's a speed merchant. Everybody knows. We've been hearing about him. It's for years. He's 3 years on campus about how fast he is. He ran a 4.4 allegedly in 2019 in terms of 4.40 flat. It was timed by Notre Dame. So take it what it is. That's like player X is 5'10", 220, and he's 5'9", $195. It's that sort of thing, when it comes to reporting metrics. But with a predicted shootout on hand, Purdue plays with a quick pace. They get a ton of snaps off, as did, I think Notre Dame's averaging about 75 snaps a game through the first 2 here because they've had to keep the pedal to the metal. I think that certainly helps Braden Lenzy. Obviously, Kevin Austin has been the preferred option so far, but Lenzy's really got the potential to break it. At $37, I think it's worth a shot. Michael, your bargain bins.
Mario Williams for Oklahoma. I don't know. DraftKings isn't realizing that he's a prominent part of that Oklahoma offense just yet. So a touchdown in each of the first 2 games. I think he led the team in targets in week 1. I expect another, 35, 40-point performance from Oklahoma against an average at best Nebraska defense. So I think you got to stick him in your lineup if you're looking for a cheaper play. And then who'd I roll with? Jalen Naylor for Michigan State. He hasn't produced at the level that his counterpart Jaden Reed has to this point, but he leads the team in routes run. He leads the team in targets. So there's a good chance, maybe the production flips this week and Naylor's the featured part of that offense. So it's just, a receiver at 4K that is leading the team in targets. I think you want to hit him.
Yeah, and that's a good point about Naylor, too. I actually been researching him because he was on PointsBet at 61.5 for the over-under. I said, oh, well, let me look. And, upon first glance, you say, all right, he had, 19 yards or something last week. He had 33, I believe, the week before, with a touchdown. So you look at it and you say, all right, well, that sounds pretty interesting. But then you dig behind, the numbers. You realize that he's been out there plenty of snaps. He's out there every snap. He and Jaden Reed are both the 1 and 2. It's not even close with anybody else. And you look at last season, 2020, where he went over that 61.5 mark more often than not. In fact, I want to say 4 of his last 6 games. And he was heavily targeted. He was the one, while Jaden Reed was kind of more the deep threat. So I just think that that's at that sort of a price. It's just too bountiful. It's a great call. The evening slate. My core two plays: Devin Tompkins for Utah State. Very, very popular guy in terms of the preseason. Obviously, Blake Anderson going over there from Arkansas State to Utah State, bringing over his high-flying offense. And we've seen that. I mean, Logan Bonner came with him. Devin Tompkins was the best receiver last year, and that is maintained and is held, even with a new coaching staff. Getting plenty of targets, 8 catches in each of the first 2 games. He's been lethal. He looks great in space. They clearly game plan him touches. And at $6,900, which is pretty reasonable considering what he's capable of. Very high floor, stable pick. You're not going to get goose egg. You're going to get probably a good 15 to 20 bankable on him. I just think that sort of that consistency cannot be understated. And then Corey Kiner, we mentioned previously at $4,000. What a smoking deal. Obviously, LSU's been more pass oriented in recent weeks, in recent years for that matter, but they need to get something going on the ground. And I think we've had enough time, 3 years of Tyrion Davis Price, to figure out that, the little Lannister, Tyrion, is just a boxy, plodding, just Chris Curry type, I guess, is if we're going to go with LSU parlance with running backs. Chris Curry, just not versatile. He's going in a straight line, not particularly elusive. He's big and, he'll crack people, but he's not hitting home runs. He's not an explosive back. And that's certainly something that Corey kind of brings to the table. You certainly see him break a long run. And against Central Michigan, they're going to want to get him some touches. They're going to want to get him some experience. I just think at $4,000, that's a smoking deal. Michael, talk about one of my favorite players this year who I have everywhere in my teams. Go.
Why did I choose him? Why did I choose him? No, you would comment on that. Apparently DraftKings algorithm is still factoring in our preseason rankings at the CFF site because they still have Braylon Sanders as the top-ranked or Ole Miss receiver this week, which, again, he's been semi-productive. He's got a touchdown this year, and he's still getting starter reps. He's playing the entire games, but at this point, Dontario Drummond at 5,900 is going to be in every single lineup. And I mean, maybe it ends up in a situation like Isaiah Bowser yesterday at 91% ownership, and then he gets injured, and then everybody gets screwed. Seems to happen more often than not with the highest owned player in these slates. But at 5,900, this Ole Miss offense, you want the wide receiver one. He's the wide receiver one at this point. Way too cheap. Have to have him in your lineup. Second guy I'm going with as a potential run back situation here is Michael Pratt. Already proven that he can succeed against a P5 defense in Oklahoma. Had 3 touchdown passes, nearly 300 yards passing. This game total sitting at 76 right now. I think Tulane can score this week against an average Ole Miss defense. The one concern here for me is the weather. Depending on the source that you look at, I was seeing around 25% chance rain. I think at another sites, I saw closer to 50% chance rain. So that could affect the game total here, could affect the passing. But Michael Pratt, as you know, is a dual threat, so he can give you production on the ground. So I like him as one of the cheaper options at quarterback.
Yeah, it's understandable because we saw what he did against Oklahoma. My God, what a revelation. Coming out party indeed. Obviously, he was really good last year, and he's probably around that QB 40 or so mark preseason. But yeah, I mean that's how it is. Dontario Drummond, you know how I feel about him. I love him. I mean that's the slot. The slot is where you want to be. Next, bargain bin. I like Tanner McKee, Stanford versus Vandy, $6,300. He's the 19th priced quarterback. We've seen Vanderbilt. We know what Vanderbilt's all about. Not very good. I mean, they were dogs to Colorado State last week. I don't know how that was the case. That shouldn't have happened. But still, a very soft Vanderbilt team. We saw Stanford absolutely light USC on fire last week. Tanner McKee had 3 touchdowns. Very highly rated recruit, just as inexperienced. But against Vandy, I really don't see that being an issue. And Mike, I'll throw you a bone. One of your guys, turnabout is fair play. Jelani Woods. Mike's guy. You can't say enough about what he's done for Virginia so far. The kid was obviously a great athlete and he had a lot of pub for Oklahoma State. But man, he's just been phenomenal. And then against a game that I think is going to be high scoring against UNC, 4K. Why not? High floor. He's going to get targets. You're going to have a floor of about 13 maybe floor. Probably got a ceiling around that 25 he was around last week. So Michael, bargain bin.
Yeah, Will Shepherd for Vanderbilt. He led the team in targets, and I believe 13 targets in week one. He's the team leader in targets with 23 currently. 3,500. Game script is going to be in Vanderbilt's favor. I think they're going to be trailing for most of the game. So, in a PPR setting, he's definitely a viable play at 3,500. The other one, a real long shot here with Jatavian Tolles for Tulane, but he leads the team in targets and routes run. I believe, we show 3,600. He might be min salary. I think he might be 3K on DraftKings, but Tulane spreads it around a little bit with their wide receivers, but he's a guy, min salary player, leads the team in targets, could be a bargain.
That's a pretty savvy play, absolutely. Jatavian, for whom the bell tolls, Tulane. We'll move on to our Prize Picks plays. Marquise Stepp, they keep listing them. 42.5 under. Take it. Roll with it. I mean, frankly, Nebraska playing Oklahoma, the first time since 2011 that they've played a Big 12 team since leaving Nebraska. And I got a feeling that there's going to be a little bit of revenge out for that from Oklahoma, even though they're leaving too. Next, Michael, what is an Emmanuel Logan Green? Who is that? What is an Emmanuel Logan Green? Because he's supposedly going to get 52.5 receiving yards against Texas A&M this week. Can you please explain?
Wide receiver 1 for New Mexico. I mean, that's all I got for him.
Okay, moving on. Josh Vann, so South Carolina, 47.5 against Georgia's vaunted secondary with probably Luke Doughty. Looks like he's going to play this week. Oh, he's not. He's not.
I think it's going to be Zeb Nolan.
It's going to be more Zebula. Okay, well, have fun with the grad assistant against Georgia. I don't care who's the quarterback. I'm taking that under every single time. 47.5. Prove it to me, Josh Vann. Who knows? James Cook. I mean, okay, let's make it 3 in a row. If you're going to keep listing his rushing yards, okay, I'm going to keep taking his under on rushing yards.
He's your new Garantano.
James is cooking, all right. He's cooking in the receiving game. You got to cook between the tackles. That's not what he does. That's what you got Kendall Milton for. That's what you got, boring Zamir White for. Come on.
Or they're going to throw for 5 touchdowns in the first half again. Who could have predicted that?
Who knew? The Stetson Bennett. Hey, maybe I can't be betting Stetson Bennett anymore this year. Fine. And lastly, I am down with the King. You're not, Mike, but I'm down with the King. King Dover, 52.5 over. I'm taking it. You are underestimating how bad ND is in terms of how porous that defense is. That front lost a lot. There's no more Owusu Koromoa out there. Okay, no, he's not out there. So I feel pretty darn good about Dover. He's going to be getting all that work. He'll bust one. I'm not worried about it. Michael, your Prize Picks.
Tyler Beatty for Missouri. I don't even know who. They're playing some southeastern Missouri, some directional school in that state. So I figure he can get 1 rushing touchdown. So I like the over there. We haven't projected at 1 rushing touchdown this week. And then Will Rogers for Mississippi State, over 20.5 fantasy points. Nobody's threatening him at the quarterback position, even though some people on this live stream thought that Jack Abraham would threaten him in the quarterback competition.
I love it.
Will Rogers getting all the snaps. This is they're facing a Memphis defense that allowed 582 passing yards and 5 touchdowns last week to Arkansas State. We know if Mississippi State is scoring, they're going to score through the air for the most part. So over 20.5 fantasy points.
Well, thank you for reminding me of that, Michael. And if you had watched the spring game like I did, you would understand why I was backing Jack Abraham, because Will Rogers looked lost out there. Now I guess I have to be a Lovertich lover boy and hope for him to come in. That being said, Mississippi State, Memphis, 20.5 fantasy points. Come on now. I mean, when it comes to, frankly, I like something about, I want to just dive into Prize Picks a little bit. When it comes to betting the unders, like I like the yardage. If I think somebody's going to be underneath, I don't want to have that potential that he catches a straight touchdown and that just ends it. But when it comes to the overs, I prefer to go in general with the fantasy points because you got so many different ways to go over as opposed to just strictly yardage. So I love that play.
We have him projected at 26 fantasy points this week, so I like that over.
I think it's very, very safe. Lastly, DraftKings. LD Brown was 55.5. It started at. I love the 51.5 rushing yards under. They got 4 guys that are getting carry there. Jalen Warren had the majority of carries last week. He led. It wasn't even great, but he got the goal line carry too, so he got the touchdown. But clearly, played LD Brown. I don't know what's going on with LD. You know, where's JB Smooth to say LD? LD's out. Give me the under. Malik Davis. Man, Malik Davis on DraftKings started out at 52.5 on his rushing. Okay. James Cook. I'll have to say the James Cook corollary, we'll call it, off the top of my head. When you got a passing down back, passing down, that's what he does. He's a specialist. And you're going for a big rushing yard line like that. 52.5. Dude, Malik Davis hadn't sniffed 52.5 before last week where he went for 114 against Cupcake City USF. Well, you're playing Bama now, okay? USF's not walking through that door, folks, to quote Rick Pitino from his ill-fated Boston Celtics tenure. So give me the under rush yards. It's gone down 38.5, so I still got to go with it. But, man, that 52.5, I try to get my column out as early as I can because of this very reason that these lines swing so quickly. It's a big difference between 52.5 and 38.5. Next, Kennedy Brooks, 58.5 rushing yards over. Prize Picks has him at 72.5. It's kind of a place where you can get a little bit of value. You get 14 yards of line value if that's something you like as a play. Conversely, if you don't think he's good for that against Nebraska in a revenge game, you go with the Prize Picks version and take the under. So you have a nice little spread there. Lastly, Marvin Mims started out at 62.5 on DKs. I tried to bet it when I first went through. It wouldn't even let it go through. They've since raised it to 69.5. Prize Picks has it at 86.5. I think that's probably much better. That's a better, sharper line because, again, Marvin Mims last year, he was only playing like 25% of the team snaps. He was just breaking in as a true freshman, despite the fact that he's literally the all-time leading single-season high school receiver in the history of our country over there in Texas. So I like his over. You're getting a lot of line value over there. Again, another 14 yards. Actually, 17.5 yards on that one. So that's what we're going to go with. Just as a wrap-up, we went 7-3 week 1 on our props and side plays. We went 6-4 last week. We'll let you know how we did this week. We're going to try to do our best. And remember to go hit the CFF site Discord. The MVP of the week for me on the Discord is my boy Leland from Oregon. Leland, shout out, giving us good info, always good insider info on the Ducks. We really appreciate that. It's definitely relevant. Michael, take us out.
Yeah, shout out to Leland as well. He gives better insights than the Oregon beat writers. So
he does.
The importance of the Discord.
Long live the Discord. If you're looking for the late breaking, we only got 52 minutes until initial kickoff. If you're looking for that late breaking news, that's where you go to get it. Everything, each team categorized. All you have to do is click on them. You're going to have the full, complete historical context, the depth charts, speculation, what we see, what we're thinking about. I mean, it's just an amazing ecosystem for anything college football related where you need all the updated info. Again, I am Eric Froton at CF Froton with NBC Sports Edge. Be on the lookout for my player props, DFS, columns, and Mike Bainbridge from the CFF site. Thank you, and have a good Saturday.